Again, folks, if you, we encourage you to keep your cameras on. I know I love to see people's faces and reactions as I'm presenting. It helps to provide some energy, the reverb that happens as a result of seeing reaction. So if you're comfortable having your cameras on, that's our preference. However, if you don't want to be in the recording, then I'll encourage you to have your camera off. As you're coming in, if you drop into the chat box your location, so we get a sense for the geographical reach of the session, as well as maybe your connection to creativity or title, so that we have a sense for the audience. So welcome to our MiniCEE number 2. My name is Dr. Gerard Puccio. I am a distinguished professor at Buffalo State University, State University of New York, starting my 32nd year at the Center for Applied Imagination, longtime chair, and I just love this work. And so these MiniCEEs, Creativity Expert Exchanges, are designed to give us a forum to share our work on a more regular basis with an audience. So let me bring up my slide deck and welcome you formally to our Mini Creativity Expert Exchange. Why do we call it our Mini Creativity Expert Exchange? It's because in March, on an annual basis now for 20-some years, we started something that we call the Creativity Expert Exchange. That's our big C event. Attracts, especially since we went virtual as a result of the pandemic. Ever since we've gone virtual, our Creativity Expert Exchange has attracted several hundred participants. And we got feedback from folks that said, hey, you guys are doing great work. Love to hear from you more regularly. I don't want to wait for a once-a-year event. Can you do something that allows us to have more touch points during the year? And so we've committed to testing this idea. This is a pilot. We'll see how it goes. Dr. Roger Firestein kicked off our first MiniCEE in early October. Today's MiniCEE is with Dr. Molly Holinger on the topic of creativity and well-being. And in November 16, specifically, we'll have our third and final MiniCEE for the fall semester with Dr. David Yates on artificial intelligence. So just a bit about, for those of you that aren't familiar with the Center for Applied Imagination, our program. So we've been around for 50+ years. We have a variety of educational programs in deliberate creativity. The most consumable is a micro-credential in applied creative thinking and problem solving, which is 2 graduate courses. We use numbers as a way of cataloging. Our graduate course is CRS 559, which is the Principles of Creative Problem Solving course, and CRS 610, the Small Group Facilitation course. Those comprise that micro-credential. That then leads into, these are all stackable, an advanced graduate certificate in creativity and change leadership, which is available online and on campus. That's an 18 credit hour SUNY graduate certificate program. Dr. Joe Udis is our distance program coordinator. And if you're interested in getting more information about our certificate program, advanced graduate certificate program, specifically for online students, it's delivered 100% online. I encourage you to reach out to Dr. Udis. And ever since the mid-1970s, we have offered a Master of Science in Creativity and Change Leadership, which is also available 100% online and on campus. And soon, we hope in one of our MiniCEE sessions in the spring semester, we hope to announce a doctorate in Creativity and Change Leadership, which is currently under review. It's been submitted. Initial approval was received, and now the full program is being reviewed by the State University of New York, and then once approved by SUNY, then on to New York State Education Department. So hopefully we'll have a MiniCEE session specifically on that to give you the details of that exciting program. And then, as I mentioned earlier, The Big C event, the Creativity Expert Exchange, is scheduled for March 7 and 8, 2024. So this 2-day conference is done virtually. The combination of keynote speakers to kick off each day, followed by concurrent sessions. We've not yet identified the keynote speakers. We put a call out for those interested in doing concurrent session presentations. And of course, we'll announce when Eventbrite is open to register for that free event. Of course, if you want more detailed information about our department and some of what I just covered, I encourage you to go to our website, lower left-hand corner, right below Alex Osborne's feet. You see the website for the department. So let's hear from an alumnus of the program, a 30-second soundbite that I think also serves as an introduction to the topic for today, creativity and well-being. Ian Rosenfeld is a graduate of our program who made a career change as a result of going through our online certificate program, followed by joining our MS program. And so let me start up that brief video, which I think provides a nice link between the impact of our program and value of it for students to the topic for today's session.
30% of my role is going to be informing national strategy for the internal organization. 70% of my job is about leading that team in the market in the Toronto region. Creative leadership doesn't just enable them professionally, but it enables, I feel strongly that it enables them personally. And if I can help somebody live their life with a more sturdy foundation in some small way, then that is effective not just for them personally, but for us professionally.
So what I love about what Ian shared is his comment about how developing your creative leadership skills doesn't only impact you professionally, but it has a personal impact on people as well. And many of our students report that going through our courses is transformative, that it helps them to grow as individuals. And today's session, I believe, with Dr. Molly Hollinger's expertise, touches precisely on this point. Alex Osborne, I will say, looking at the graphic of Alex Osborne in his, this I believe, presentation for Edward R. Murrow National Radio Program, he starts by saying that deliberate creative effort leads to and promotes and facilitates a good life. And so even going back to the early days in the field, I think folks like Osborne recognize the close relationship between creativity and well-being. So I am incredibly pleased to introduce to you Dr. Molly Holinger, who joined our faculty last year. So she's already a veteran of the department, but she comes to the department with a lot of expertise, having taught undergraduate and graduate courses in creativity for many years, having studied with one of the current scholars in the field who's widely recognized as a thought leader in the field, Dr. James Kaufman. Dr. Holinger did her PhD at the University of Connecticut under the supervision of Dr. James Kaufman. I suspect in her presentation, she'll make some reference to those experiences. And Molly has really carved out for herself as a niche area of expertise, the topic that she's going to be sharing with you today, and that is how creativity contributes to well-being. So I'm going to turn over to Molly, but before Molly takes the microphone, let me just say that I encourage folks to post questions. I'll be monitoring the chat box. At the end of Molly's presentation, we're going to open it up for Q&A. That will happen in one of two ways. Because I'm monitoring the chat box, I'll look to see if there are any themes in the questions, and I'll pose those to Molly. If there are specific questions that come up, I may call on the individual who posted that question to go ahead and give voice to that question. So we'll sort of improvise and play that by ear as we get to that segment of our session. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Dr. Holinger to share with us her expertise related to this very, very important topic. Molly, over to you.
Thanks, Gerard. I don't know if I would say I'm a veteran after 1 year, but if that
Well, I was referring to your many years of experience that you bring to the department. So let me say a young veteran, the field of creativity. Let me qualify that.
Well, thank you for that generous introduction. So as Gerard mentioned, I've focused primarily on creativity and well-being as my topic of research, and I'm so pleased and so grateful that so many of you are here and interested in that topic. So thank you for taking the time out of the middle of your day during the week to be here and to engage in this presentation and some question and answer on the topic of creativity and well-being. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I got into this topic first, and then share some of my work on it. I don't know if anyone's come across the terms MiniCEE or PhD, but I would say that I am a classic example of that. So I think I first heard these terms in grad school, and essentially what that means is that you engage in some type of research that's very related to your personal identity. And looking around me, I could see quite a bit of truth in that. So for example, if we look at our faculty with Dr. Susan Keller-Mathers, she studied highly creative women and is certainly a creative woman in her own right. And then Dr. Gerard Puggio, who is the chair of our department, studies leadership, so fitting. And we also have a new faculty member, Dr. Ozzy Prak, and she studies gifted education. And if you have even like a 5-minute conversation with her, you'll realize quite quickly that she is a gifted individual herself. So, I'm teasing my colleagues here a little bit, but I am guilty of MiniCEE as well, and namely how well-being relates, and namely looking at well-being and how we respond to things like stress and anxiety and negative events and experiences. And this is something that I experienced as a student, so in my undergraduate, graduate, and I'm recognizing it quite a bit in the students that I'm teaching now as well. And according to a study in 2018, 63% of college students experienced overwhelming anxiety within that year. And thinking in terms of the pandemic, that was pre-pandemic, right? So I would imagine that now it's even more present. And so looking back on my own experience, and also that experience at that time in your life, it's kind of an odd time as a student where you're getting hit with a lot of stuff, right? You're realizing that you have to pay taxes on auto insurance, and you're not old enough to buy beer at that point, which just makes things worse. I, perhaps unwisely, took a course called Existence, Death, and the Meaning of Being Human. And from that, I took away that human existence was be relatively meaningless, and one day I was going to die. So I'm not sure that's what Dr. Martin had intended, but that was my takeaway. But fortunately, the next semester I took my first course in creativity, and I found this to be much more positive, really the opposite of that existentialism course. And it was thinking about, what is possible rather than the bleakness of human existence. So this opened up a lot of possibilities that led me to Buffalo State. And then after that, as Gerard mentioned, to the University of Connecticut, where I had the opportunity to study with James Kaufman. So James is another, he's also guilty of MiniCEE in some of you may have heard him talk about himself as a failed creative writer rather than one of the most eminent creativity researchers that we know. And some of you may also know that his parents were very involved in, and his father is still involved in, creativity or assessment, so intelligence testing. And so he married these two interests, and his main focus for many years was creativity assessment. But in the past 5 years, he had a heart attack, and with that experience had a shift in focus where he started looking at sort of the bigger questions in life and how creativity could lead to well-being. And anyone who knows James would, never wish a heart attack upon him. But I will say that it was sort of an alignment in terms of I came into graduate school knowing that this is what I wanted to focus on. And at the same time, his focus was moving in that direction as well. And so as a result, we've had a collaboration on creativity and well-being. The most current project that we took on was writing a chapter for the Cambridge Handbook of Creativity and Emotions. And this is a really wonderful volume that came out this past year. It was edited by Zorana Ivcevic-Pringle, who was our keynote at CEE last year. So some of you may recognize that name, and Jessica Hoffman. And we wrote a chapter about how everyday creativity was related to meaning and well-being. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Most of creativity research has focused on creativity as a predictor variable. So what interventions, what trainings, what traits can lead to increased creativity. And so now we know quite a bit about what makes a creative person, what are the most effective creativity training techniques and strategies, which is great. Those are important questions to answer. But we were interested in looking at creativity as an input variable. So when we engage in creative activities, what positive outcomes can we draw from that? And that's a big question to ask. So where do you even start, right? And we decided to start with some models of well-being and then see what connections we could draw from there. So I'll just touch briefly on the models that we looked at. First of all, subjective well-being. So this is from Ed Diener And basically, the idea behind this is that people are pretty good judges of their own well-being. And it comprises of life satisfaction. So the way that this is measured is simply asking people, how satisfied are you with your life? And then affect as well. So what's the presence of positive affect and the absence of negative affect? And this is in contrast to psychological well-being, which is from Carol Riff. And the difference here is that she gives some criteria that you can sort of rate your well-being on. So 6 different dimensions that give you, I guess, a sense for where you fall on the spectrum of well-being, and you might be higher on one and lower on the other. But in contrast to Diener's model, it gives you some concrete criteria to work off of. And then we have the self-determination theory, which probably many of you are familiar with. And this is how you live sort of like a holistic life and feel motivated. So this is made up of autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And then we have the PERMA model from Martin Seligman, and he founded the positive psychology movement along with Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And he has 5 dimensions here: positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishments. So we looked at these models, and you'll notice that there are some overlaps between them. And so we looked at these overlaps, and then from there, how did they relate to creativity, or which ones were present in the creativity research literature. And what we found was 5 areas of connection. So socialization or connectedness, personal growth, meaning, positive emotion, and flow. And you can see how those are articulated in these different models of well-being. We don't have enough time today to cover all of these, but I would like to hit on 3 of them. So first of all, personal growth, flow, and emotions. I think we all recognize that in life, we all encounter struggle, right? It's inevitable, but how we respond to that struggle can have a large impact on our well-being. And there's a concept called post-traumatic growth, which I think Viktor Frankl captures quite well in his quote when he says, in some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment that it finds meaning. And I don't want to suggest here that we, should seek out adverse events in our lives. But I think we also recognize that many times we grow the most when we go through these difficult events or times, and we come out stronger. And a nice metaphor for this is something called kintsugi pottery. It's a Japanese technique, and what they do is that they break this piece of pottery, and then they put it back together using a gold paint. And so arguably it's more beautiful after it's been broken than in its original state. And Tedeschi and Calhoun, who came up with this concept of post-traumatic growth, identified 5 areas. So these are appreciate life more, you use your personal strengths more, take advantage of them and recognize them, strengthening of relationships, identifying new possibilities for your life, and spiritual development. And then there's a researcher, her name is Marie Forgeard, and she is both a clinical psychologist as well as a creativity researcher. And she identified or proposed a sixth dimension of post-traumatic growth, namely creative growth. And she found in her research that this was related to two other components of post-traumatic growth, possibilities for one's life. And I think that makes a lot of sense, right? You're engaging in divergent thinking what if, and also changes in relationships. And this is kind of interesting because she found both positive and negative relationships were connected to creative growth. And so just reflecting on, why that might be the case, perhaps it's dismissing a toxic relationship or using those negative emotions or processing those negative emotions from that relationship through creativity. So that leads us into the next connection, which is how do emotions and creativity relate? In general, high energy or pleasant emotions, high energy, pleasant emotions are the most related to creativity. Low energy, pleasant, related, but not quite as strongly. High energy, unpleasant seem to be detrimental to creativity. And then low energy, unpleasant seem to be unrelated. And what that means a little bit more concretely to give you an idea for what types of emotions fall under these categories. This is a really wonderful tool called the Mood Meter, which came out of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And you can see high energy, pleasant emotions. Some examples of those are confident, energized, whereas low energy and unpleasant emotions, some examples are depressed or tired. And this research has been extended through experience sampling studies. So a lot of the research in the past has been focused on, what is the connection between creativity and emotions, but what is beautiful or unique about experience sampling studies is that they can tell us something about causality. So we can actually make some conclusions about if we engage in creativity, what will be the results, because they look at results over time. So this might be something like sending out a survey over a couple of weeks, or sending text messages throughout the day over a week, but they're capturing data over time. And there have been a few really nice studies done in the past 5 years or so, one of which concluded that creative days are characterized by greater emotional zest and engagement. And another one found this mutually reinforcing relationship between well-being and creativity. So sort of this upward spiral. So if you engaged in creativity, that led you to have greater well-being. And then, and that was the following day. And then this increase in well-being prompted you to engage in creativity. And it just kept reinforcing one another. However, that doesn't tell the whole story. So if we look at the creativity in terms of the creative process, it becomes a little bit more nuanced. So a lot of these studies looked at emotions in relation to divergent thinking, but I think most of us here recognize that creativity is not only divergent thinking, right? It's also convergent thinking. So emotions can play different roles depending on what task you are trying to accomplish or what stage you're at in the process. For example, if we look at happiness, happiness is great for when you're engaging in tasks that require spontaneity, playfulness, less self-consciousness. And so it might be especially conducive to something like brainstorming. Whereas if you are making a big financial decision, perhaps that's not the best frame of mind to be doing when you're doing that type of convergent thinking. On the other hand, if we look at something like sadness, this can be especially useful for analytical tasks. And it could be useful for when you're in the stage of the process where you're refining. So you might have some self-criticism. It could help you persist through that stage of the process that can be, particularly difficult. But it might be less helpful for something like planning a fun Halloween party with Halloween coming up shortly. So this is an example of using emotion to help thinking. And that is one of the 4 branches of emotional intelligence that relates to creativity. And another branch that relates to creativity is regulating emotions. So regulating emotion is influence or changing the course of one's emotion by using regulation strategies. And again, going back to that reality that we all experience negative emotions, but we have some control over them, or at least a control over how we respond to them. So to give you an example, let's say you're, running late to a birthday party and you think, oh, like my friend's just gonna hate me. You could think about that from another perspective and reframe that and say, I can't wait to tell this funny story about why I'm late, or I'm so happy that I spared myself from talking to my annoying coworker for 30 minutes. So in the emotions world, this is called cognitive reappraisal, but I'm guessing that many of you are thinking something along the lines of, what does this sound like? To me, it sounds like reframing the problem, right? And I've been reading Elon Musk's recent biography by Walter Isaacson, and just a couple of days ago, I read a passage where he was trying to start his space company, and he originally thought that he would buy pre-made rockets from Russia, and so went to meet with some people in Russia and got close to a deal, but ended up breaking off the deal because they were just charging exorbitant rates and not very friendly to Musk. And so he said, I was pretty mad, and when I get mad, I try to reframe the problem. And so from there, he decided, I'm not going to buy a rocket, I'm going to make my own rocket. And so I thought that was a great example of reframing the problem in terms of creativity. Also, this skill of regulating emotion relates to a concept called flow. And I imagine, again, that many of you are familiar with this concept of flow, but in case this is new to anyone, it's a state that we reach when the level of skill that we possess is matched with the level of challenge in whatever we're engaged in. So video game designers are geniuses in creating flow experiences, right? They help you level up, but without overwhelming you. And this state turns out to be a very transcendent state. So Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who coined this term, called it optimal experience, because when we're in flow, we are totally absorbed in what we're doing. And he gives some examples of activities that could lead to flow. He says, for a child, it could be placing with trembling fingers the last block on a tower she has built. For a swimmer, it could be trying to beat his own record. And for a violinist, mastering an intricate musical passage. So athletics are a big source of flow. You'll hear that often, like the runner's high. But we also see with the child and the violinist, these are creative activities. So creative activities are often a source of flow. And importantly, flow is something that when we know how you get into flow, so matching that level of skill with the level of challenge, you can make it happen and deliberately cultivate that. So how does that relate to well-being? Well, that can be one way of regulating emotion, especially when we get into this state of rumination, which I'm sure we have all experienced at some point, is when you have those thoughts that keep repeating over and over in your mind. And so if you're able to get into this state of flow where you're completely absorbed, it can cut off or distract from those thoughts of rumination. So importantly, like creativity, emotions just don't happen to us, but we can use them and influence them, just like we can deliberately improve our creativity. Okay, so putting that all together, where do I land in terms of the relationship between creativity and well-being? Well, first of all, at the everyday level, which we can all engage in creativity at the everyday level. We all have that capacity as humans. Creativity and well-being are related. So we see that with those studies on emotions and those experience sampling studies, as well as now we even have meta-analyses on creativity and well-being that demonstrate a positive relationship between creativity and well-being. And I also think that Simonton puts it well when he says that there may be an optimal amount of psychopathology. So at the clinical level, that is not going to be productive for creativity. You're not going to be able to produce something that is both novel and useful. But at the subclinical level, when we have things like negative emotions, those can actually be harnessed for our creativity. And you know, creativity is hard when you get into certain stages of the process, right? And so being able to persist and wanting to you know, do better, be productive, those negative emotions can be helpful. And I just want to end by saying what I would like to see in the future. So first of all, I would love to see more experience sampling studies or intervention studies where we can see an actual causality. So creativity is the driver, and what can we get out of that? And also, I'm curious to know more about for whom does creativity predict well-being? So, creativity is not the only pathway to well-being. There's other things like having children or spirituality that can lead to well-being. But are there certain individuals who really respond to creativity as a means to develop their well-being? So perhaps people who are more open to experience, for example, or other individual differences. Well, thank you again so much for being here today. And I think we have a few minutes for questions. So I'd like to open it up for some discussion.
So Molly, I'll jump in if you don't mind. I'll moderate that. I think, first of all, your presentation was so engaging and so enthralling that there were no questions that popped up in the chat box. It was mainly reactions to what you were sharing. So appreciate that. So if you want to stop sharing your slides so that we can take up more of the screen space, and I put into the chat box an invitation to pose questions. But since I have you, I'm going to start off by posing some questions to you. So this week, you and I both covered in our current issues classes the research on the efficacy of creativity training. So how does training impact participants who've gone through training? And in both sessions, we started by asking our students to reflect on how the training had personally impacted them. And I'm going to say that based on my understanding of the literature, I don't think we've gone deep enough in really lots of studies on how have we impacted divergent thinking, how have we impacted creative performance, research on looking at a shift in attitudes, which starts to move in the direction of well-being. It feels to me like we're missing something in that research, that we really haven't isolated and dug deeply into how creativity training can be transformative. So I'm going to ask you to go out on a limb based on your experiences in delivering courses to undergraduate students, to graduate students. You've done training programs. What are the ways that you feel from your observation and what you've heard from students that training in creative process is transformative? What are we not isolating and showcasing in research that we should start looking at based on your observations? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So most of the studies on like the intervention studies on creativity and well-being are focused on arts therapy. And that's where we get some of the conclusions like socialization is conducive to well-being. So like through these arts therapy programs that are, community programs, and a lot of these are actually with people who are like older. So this gives them a way to connect with others and also engage in creativity at the same time. So a lot of what we know in terms of like causality and engaging in creative activities is isolated to the arts therapies. And we know, right, that's a small portion of creativity, and some people gravitate towards the arts, but creative problem solving and engaging in that, I would guess would be highly rewarding as well. But we really don't have any research on that, interventionist research on how teaching someone in creative problem solving, or perhaps engaging a group in creative problem solving, how that would increase creativity, because that would produce many of the same outcomes as an art therapy session, right? You're engaging with others, you're feeling, a sense of like motivation and engagement. And so those pieces I think are very much embedded in that. We just have not deliberately studied that. So, if anyone's looking for a dissertation topic, there you go.
Agreed. And I'm hoping that when we launch our DPS program, Doctor of Professional Studies in Creativity and Change Leadership, I think it's important for us to study ourselves. And well, you were involved in the CPS and small group research study, shorthand title for it, the BUS study, and how by studying ourselves, we get a better sense for the impact of our training. Thinking about how groups, when we were trying to manipulate them with different sets of instructions, how those with advanced training literally didn't see how we were trying to manipulate them. They were sort of impervious to it because their training overrode the instructions to, I'm thinking specifically where we instructed them through the brief to criticize each other while generating ideas, and they literally didn't see that. So, I'm thinking anecdotal story. I remember our 2017 50th anniversary where we sent out an alumni survey to our alumni and asked about the impact. Tell us a story about how this educational experience has been transformative. And I remember someone writing a story about how prior to coming into the graduate program, she had her first child, let's say a daughter, went through the graduate program, and then had her second child, a son, and made the statement, I wish I had had this training before my first child, because it completely changed, or it modified in significant ways, how I raised my son. And so it feels like to me, we're just scratching the surface in terms of how training, whether it be design thinking or synectics or biomimicry or creative problem solving, just suggesting that maybe there's a lot more out there to be discovered in terms of how well-being can be uplifted or impacted or facilitated through deliberate creativity training. So any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that's certainly true. And I am seeing a shift towards that, which is really great. And I think part of that comes from a reaction to the pandemic, right? So people are looking at ways to, respond to difficult events, and how do different skills like identifying the problem. There's been some research by Ronnie Ryder-Paulman on that in relationship to the pandemic. And then just in terms of, how does research on well-being compare to other areas of creativity research? In 2016, it was around 7.5%, and that was the research that's both mental health and mental illness. So that's a pretty small slice of the pie, and I would imagine that it's more now, but at the time that was a small piece. So I think it's definitely an opportunity for further research.
So as we're chatting, some further questions are coming in, and along this similar theme, Molly, many of our students say that going through, and not just our students, people who've attended the Creative Problem Solving Institute, for example, will suggest that they have had a transformative experience. And I don't think learning tools is necessarily transformative. I think there's a deeper psychology happening to invoke that kind of a strong reaction. And so Helene Bates, and I think it kind of relates to this point, and the question is, do you believe the link to well-being is driven by engaging in creativity, or is it driven by adopting the principles of a creative mindset? And I prefaced it by saying it's not necessarily the tools. What might be transformative are some of the fundamental principles and what happens, as a result in terms of a shift in one's own mindset. Thoughts on that, the creative mindset connection to well-being.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure you can really separate the two, right? So if you're engaging in creativity, you're going to have a creative mindset within that, right? So you're practicing principles like deferring judgment, right? And so I think the two are very related. Maybe the question is getting at sort of the need to actually practice what you preach in the sense that, just like anything, you need to, in order to get better at it, you have to actually engage in it. So if you want to, increase your well-being, increase your creativity, you're going to have to actually engage in those behaviors, right? So if you want to, become more physically fit, that's you can't just have the mindset of, I would love to become more physically fit, but you have to actually
Actualize it in some way. Yeah. Well, that reminds me of, as you know, the research that Nagma Khan, as her master's project, did recently, speaking of mindset, thinking about foresight and the 4 preferences measured by foresight and its relationship to emergency room doctors and how they predicted burnout in this emergency room environment, where a clarifying mindset exacerbated emotional exhaustion, whereas an ideating mindset built greater coping in terms of a greater sense of personal accomplishment, which seemed to create some resistance to burnout. So you didn't use the word specifically, but that's a preamble into the ways in which you might feel that creativity contribute to resilience or coping. You had that lovely graphic about life, and life will present struggles. And from an everyday creativity perspective, the value of tapping into your creativity to improve coping skills or resiliency. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. So I talked a little bit about how we respond to negative events shapes what happens going forward, and your well-being, your life satisfaction going forward. So for instance, if you there are a lot of traits related to creative people, like openness to experiences is the most robust connection between personality traits and creativity. And so people who are open to experience tend to respond to adverse events in a more positive way. It's also the people who are like adventure seeking rather than like avoidance seeking tend to respond more positively to adverse events. So it seems that people who, I guess, take resilience, take adverse experiences sort of in stride and as a way to grow, tend to do better in the long run. And that goes back to that whole post-traumatic growth piece.
Yeah.
And I think many of us can, identify periods in our lives where we grew the most through experiencing struggle, right? And that's not necessarily something that we want to invite, but we're going to encounter it at some point. And if you're able to kind of harness that and see it, and again, going back to that, in our language, I see it as reframing the problem, right? So you see issues as an opportunity.
Well, you talked about the importance of being aware of your emotions, being able to identify your emotions, to regulate your emotions, right? And that makes me think of something, again, that hasn't been identified through research, but I anecdotally feel it's something that we impact through our education, which is self-creative leadership. So that, you know, what do we talk about in terms of creative mindset? Instead of wallowing in failure and beating yourself up and you know, deflating mood and emotion, how do you learn it? How do you shift it into a learning experience, for example? So I feel like there's much more to be done. I'm so glad you're on our team and that this is an area of interest for you for your research. So we look forward to you delving more deeply into this over your career.
Just real quick that thinking about you know, how you respond to things, it can become, you know, a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So with the, you know, avoidance, if you it can be just confirmation, right? That if you avoid what you're maybe afraid of or is causing you pain, etc., you just affirm that that's the case. But if you sort of take it head on, and that goes back to the whole creative self-efficacy and Bandura, and so
Yeah. So as we're wrapping up, I'm going to encourage folks to drop some positive or affirmative comments into the chat box to help uplift Molly, and thanks for her delightful presentation. Molly, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. I'm going to wrap things up by sharing a couple of slides in terms of how we go forward from here, the next MiniCEE, and then how to stay in contact with the department. So a very timely topic. Our next MiniCEE is on artificial intelligence. Dr. David Yates, one of our stellar adjunct faculty members, will be delivering that session. We will be announcing and sharing a link to register through Eventbrite for this November 16th session on using artificial intelligence as a tool to promote creativity. And then we encourage you to follow us. If you go to our website, you'll find you can follow us in Facebook and, of course, LinkedIn. And we welcome you to email us with any questions or comments as well. So once again, Molly, terrific MiniCEE session. Really appreciate your expertise. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in a future MiniCEE virtual event. Take care, all. Thank you for joining us.